been lied to about productivity. Getting more done won't solve your time problem, it'll make it worse. Today we are exploring 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. This isn't just another take on productivity hacks or time-saving tricks. It goes deeper, challenging the very way we think about time, work, and what it means to live a meaningful life. At its core, the book can be broken down into a few key themes. Number 1, the productivity trap. Why trying to optimize every second only makes us feel busier. And number 2, the illusion of control. How we've been conditioned to think of time as a resource to be used rather than something we are. Number 3, the cost of trying to do it all. Why the pursuit of efficiency actually prevents us from doing the things that matter. Number 4, reframing time. How accepting our limits can be the key to freedom. And then number 5, attention as the true currency. Why what we focus on ultimately shapes our lives. This isn't just theory, it's a wake-up call. The way we've been taught to think about time isn't just stressful, it's broken. But before we go any further, welcome to Wise Words, where we take the most powerful books and distill their insights into practical wisdom you can apply today. This episode is a distillation of 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman, a book that will completely change how you see time and productivity. If you ever felt overwhelmed, always behind, or like you're never doing enough, this one's for you. We're diving into why our modern obsession with time management is actually making things worse and what to do instead. Because here's the truth. The more productive you get, the more there is to do. The inbox never stays empty. The to-do list never ends. And the feeling that you finally get on top of everything, that never arrives. But there's another way to look at time, one that's freeing instead of frustrating. And that's what we're unpacking today. So if you find this episode valuable, hit like and subscribe. It helps us bring you more of these deep dives. So let's start with a question then. What if everything you know about productivity is wrong? Here's the first idea we took away.
Yeah. And it's before getting onto that, I did find this book. I remember reading when I was reading it. I loved it. It really spoke to me. And I just thought it was funny that it's commercialized, or it's as a time management book. But I don't see it as time management. I see it as almost time philosophy, because it's more about our relationship with time rather than, because it was funny. I remember being on this job and it was on a cruise, and a lot of the time in between filming, I was just reading this book, and people would come up and they're like, oh, what's the book about? And it literally says time management, and I just look like the most boring person, but I was just trying to convince her. I was like, no, it's not just time management. It's a much bigger philosophy and blah, blah, blah.
It's time philosophy. That doesn't exactly sound much more exciting.
No, it doesn't. But I don't know. I feel like people have a kind of, unless you're like a productivity nerd, then, time management it's so corporate. It just sounds so devoid of any kind of life. Whereas this whole book is about living and, having a much healthier relationship with time. But yeah, it's just funny. Anyway, on to the first point. So the productivity trap. See, we've all been sold the same promise. Get more done and you'll finally feel on top of things. Productivity gurus tell us that the secret to a better life is a perfect morning routine, a streamlined to-do list, or an optimized workflow. But here's the problem. It actually never works. See, the more efficient you become, the more work piles up. Your inbox doesn't stay empty, it refills faster. Clearing your schedule just makes room for more obligations. It's like trying to empty an overflowing river with a bucket. And the truth is, productivity is a trap. Every time you squeeze more out of your time, new demands rush in to take its place. And the result? Well, we're busier than ever, constantly haunted by the feeling that we should be getting more done. But why does this happen? Why does doing more only makes us feel further behind? Well, it all comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding. You see, we treat time as something to be managed, a scarce resource to be optimized. But in reality, time isn't a resource at all. The real problem isn't that we don't have enough time. It's that we've been trained to believe that being busy equals being valuable. And that if we just keep pushing, one day we'll reach a state where everything is handled. But that day literally never comes. Gosh, it's just speaking to my soul. And here's where it gets even trickier. Busyness has been rebranded. It's no longer just an unfortunate side effect of work. It's become a status symbol. We celebrate hustle culture, treating relentless work as an identity, something to be proud of. But deep down, we know something's off. No matter how much we accomplish, we're just left feeling anxious, restless, and somehow empty. And it's really, I tell you, one of the biggest things that I took away from this was just the idea that we try to control time, that like time is a product or it's a resource. And that in itself was kind of just like it's obvious, but it's also kind of a bit of a paradigm shift in how you think about time, because time is just time. It just exists. We don't have control over it, but we're trying to convince ourselves that we do. And it's interesting.
Yeah, I still love the idea that, productivity is actually a trap in the sense that the work is never really completed. So like the faster you do the work, it just means you can handle more work. So the irony is you actually just increase your capacity and then you end up doing more of the stuff you dislike, which I think is quite self-defeating almost.
Yeah. And I think the fact is that, like, if you are someone who, everyone values something to some extent, which means you'll always find something to then fill that gap that you want to do, right? Let's say you tick something off your to-do list and you're like, oh, I want to do this. And so it keeps coming time and time again. And you'll never get to that point, like you were saying, that day where you've sorted everything, because it just doesn't exist.
Or the day, like when he says like you finally got it under control kind of thing, it just never arrives because, there's always more flow of tasks to do.
Yeah. And it's weird because it's almost like unintentional, like arrogance in a way, as in like we think that we can control it and that we think we're bigger than it, but it's almost just to like convince ourselves, that we can make the most out of life, and this is how you go about doing it.
Yeah, it's almost like there was a book, The Control Heuristic, but like I still remember the point being like, we obviously get pleasure from controlling our reality. So we want to be able to control time. We think we can. And that's, I guess, like you just said, arrogance and hubris. Because, time and time again, we get blindsided by a never-ending to-do list or things that you never realize you had to do. And that just comes along and you're like, oh, wow, I'll add that to the list,
Yeah, no, so true. So, what's the way out then? If productivity isn't the answer, what is? Well, before we get there, we have to unravel the deeper issue, the way we've been trained to think about time itself. Because if we don't change that, we'll stay stuck in a cycle where we're always running, but never arriving.
So introducing the second idea, the illusion of control. So why do we feel like we're constantly fighting against time? Why do we chase productivity, believing that one day we'll finally be on top of everything, only to find ourselves drowning in even more? Well, it's because we've been taught a lie, that time is something we can control. Think about how we talk about time. We say we spend it, we waste it, we save it like it's money in a bank account. Something to be managed and optimized. But that's not how time actually works. Time isn't a resource. It's not something separate from us, flowing by while we try to grab as much of it as we can. Time is us. And yet, we've been trained to treat it like a commodity, something to be bought, sold, and maximized. This mindset runs deep. In the past, workers were paid for a day's work. But once factory owners realized they could pay by the hour, everything changed. Time became something to be used efficiently, and any moment that wasn't productive was seen as a waste. And that idea didn't just stay in factories, it seeped into everything. Now we treat time as something to manage instead of just living it. And this sets up an impossible game. No matter how much you optimize your time, there'll always be more to do. And no matter how much you schedule, control, and plan, uncertainty will always be there. And here's the real kicker. The more we try to control time, the more anxious we become. The more we plan, the more we worry about things going off plan. The more we optimize, the more we feel like we're falling behind. And it's a game we can't win. So what if we stop playing? What if we let go of the idea that time is something to master and started seeing it as something to experience? And that's the shift that changes everything. Instead of squeezing more into our days, we start focusing on what actually matters. Instead of treating every moment as a stepping stone to some future goal, we start living in this moment. Yeah, and I love this. Just a huge reframe, like you said. It sounds a bit deep and philosophical, doesn't it? Time is us.
Yeah.
But it's true. Like your life is just time.
Yeah.
Being experienced, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so then, this is where it kind of bridges with mindfulness and everything like that, because the idea, like, if you are just time, then the best thing to do with your time is basically to be present so that you can actually enjoy the experience. You
Enjoy it.
can
Yeah.
be present and get the most out of things, rather than being like, okay, well, I'm taking myself out of the present moment by thinking, how can I use this time most efficiently? But the idea that you can use something most efficiently means that there is something to complete. Do you know what I mean? As in, like, there is an end goal, but there isn't,
Yeah.
it doesn't exist.
I mean, I guess it raises the point, I guess, if we are just time, then we should be spending time in the way that's most enjoyable almost. I mean, obviously that leads into sort of hedonistic traps, but the point here is that we should, yeah. Obviously we see it, and the society has conditioned us to believe it is a resource, which I guess technically speaking, to some extent, you can frame it that way, and it does make sense to frame it that way. But I think we all fall trapped to the idea that, we really shouldn't be optimizing our time for productivity reasons. We should just be trying to enjoy it, and like you said, be present and do things that you don't think of as a waste of time. Which I would imagine a lot of productivity stuff, actually, you do realize deep down, although you're doing more and more of it, like replying to emails, a lot of it is a waste of time.
Yeah.
So before we can embrace this illusion of control fully, there's one more illusion we need to break, because the real struggle isn't just about using time, it's about fearing that we'll never have enough of it.
Yes, so the cost of trying to do it all. So why does it feel like we're always running out of time? Why, no matter how much we get done, do we still feel behind? It's because we're chasing an impossible goal, trying to do everything. We tell ourselves that if we just optimize our schedules, stay disciplined, and work a little harder, we'll finally get through all our tasks and obligations. But here's the truth: we never will. There will always be more emails, more meetings, more errands, more projects that feel urgent, more expectations, both from others and from ourselves. And the brutal reality: there will never be enough time for everything that feels important. And that's exactly what makes our choices meaningful. Every decision to spend time on something is a decision not to spend it on something else. Every yes is a silent no to 100 other possibilities. That's not a failure of time management, it's just life. But instead of accepting this, we resist it. We tell ourselves that if we just work smarter, hustle harder, or find a perfect system, we'll finally get it all done. And this keeps us trapped, because the moment we clear our plate, more piles on. The moment we finish one project, another deadline appears. And the moment we finally feel like we're catching up, we realize there's still an entire life we've been putting off, waiting for the right time to enjoy it. But what if we flipped the script? What if instead of trying to fit everything in, we started by deciding what won't make the cut? Because here's the hard truth: you will miss out. That's unavoidable. But you get to choose what you miss out on. You get to decide what actually deserves your time, so you don't waste your days on things that don't. The way out of this trap isn't to manage time better. It's to accept that you are already making trade-offs. The only question is, are you making the right ones? And I think this begs in, like, a really good point, that to make a decision, you have to be, you have to be good at discernment. You have to be able to, choose which one's more beneficial. But to the idea of choosing something that is more beneficial, you have to have an idea in mind of what you're who you want to be, right? If this is how you're going to spend time, that makes up your life, then how do you want to live your life? What do you value? What should you value? It's not just work. It's not just sending emails and being productive. There's also, being, seeing friends and family and engaging in life itself. So that's probably a good thing to have an idea and an understanding of, so that then you can make these proper decisions. Be like, look, I'm not going to do that because that one doesn't have as much value to me as this,
Yeah. And I really like the idea as well of when he says something like, there's still an entire life we've been putting off, waiting for the right time to enjoy it. I think that's a really important part as well. Like, how many times do we say, I mean, I know I'm guilty of this in the past, but just like, I'll do that when the time's right. Like, I'll go start doing these classes when this happens. And then that situation never happens. You just never start doing the things that you want to do in the first place, right? Because we always put it into the future, like, when the conditions are perfect, I will finally put the things I value first. And I feel like we're all guilty to that to some extent. because we almost use the lack of time. And I genuinely do believe that when somebody says lack of, like, oh, I didn't have enough time, it's always just a value choice.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you're choosing to not prioritize the thing that you're talking about. Because you can always get up earlier. And I know there's people out there who always say, like, oh, no, I got, responsibilities and stuff. But in my head, there's plenty of places where you could probably make the time, or at least try to.
Yeah.
Even if it's like small moments on weekends or whatever. But I do find it quite interesting that, we tend to almost push our desires and the things we should be deciding to actually do into the future, and then use this idea of, oh yeah, if the timing's right or if the conditions are there, I'm going to enjoy this. It's like the people who say, yeah, when I've got £1 million or something and I'm retired, I'm going to go enjoy mojitos on a beach. It's like, no, you can go enjoy mojitos on a beach pretty much now.
Yeah.
You don't need.
There's always time to enjoy mojitos on a beach.
Yeah.
No, it's funny
that.
You
know what I mean?
I think it's interesting because I've come across this fairly recently, is because you can't do everything at once. Just focus on one thing at a time, or focus on the thing that you want to do right now. But it doesn't mean you can't do that thing in the future. Okay. But it just means that, like, if I try to do it all at once, I'm not really going to make any headway. Right. So an example will be, like, at the moment I'm training for a triathlon. Okay. So that's kind of one of my goals that I'm set on. But I probably won't be doing triathlon training for the rest of my life. And I also don't want to fall into this this habit of way of thinking that, like, I need to be the best at whatever I'm doing, because I don't. I'm not going to be a triathlete who, competes for number one. I'm not, but I just want to do it because it's a goal that I want to do and I enjoy it, right? But then it means that, like, okay, well, once I've done my triathlon stuff, then I can do the other thing. Maybe I want to go into kettlebell training or climbing, but I don't need to do all three of those things all at once, because if I do, then I'm not going to make any progress. And so I think that is kind of being able to structure your life in a way that you can substitute things now and then. You can, like, okay, for 6 months, I'm going to give this a proper go. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to give it everything and not be distracted by doing loads of other things. And then once I've done that, okay, if I really enjoy it, maybe I continue doing it. But if I want to, like, okay, now I want to do climbing, I substitute that in. And that's kind of like, I'm starting to see that more and more in, like, other realms, not just like in fitness, but the idea that, like, oh, okay, I will get around to doing that. I've got so much more time in my life anyway, and I don't need to rush everything. I don't need to, like, fall victim to this idea that, like, I need to do everything right now. I feel that frees you up a lot, because you're making that decision, like, okay, I'm not sacrificing that forever. It's still there. It's on the benches, but I'll get to that later on. And now I'm going to put all of my time and be present and focus on this. No,
that's a good point. I think sometimes people forget that you have many, many years and weeks to live, so you can, achieve both. But you're right, you're probably better off focusing one thing at a time, especially if the areas you're pursuing, let's just say, like you said, it was sort of like fitness. You're probably better off focusing on one at a time. I mean, it works with many things. Like if you're trying to learn a new skill, it's probably best to focus on one and not three.
Yeah. But I do think that we tend to fall into this, like, kind of ambitious race for no reason. It's like, we need to be the best at whatever we do, and we need to be doing everything all the time, because that's just the grind that gets kind of promoted to us. But actually, like, you just take your time and enjoy the stuff that you do, and that actually has a much better well-being for it.
Yeah, for sure.
So on that, that brings us to the next big shift: how to stop chasing control and start making time work for you instead.
Yes. So the next idea is reframing time, how accepting our limits will create freedom. So we spend our lives fighting against time. We treat it like an enemy, something to conquer, to optimize, and to control. But what if the real solution isn't to fight time, but to surrender to it? That sounds counterintuitive, but here's why it matters. We don't have time, as we said before, we are time. And the reason we feel constantly rushed, overwhelmed, and behind isn't because we're managing our time poorly, it's because we refuse to accept a simple, unavoidable truth. We are finite. We will never do everything we want to do. We will never read all the books, travel to all the places, meet all the people, or accomplish all our goals. Every moment we spend on one thing is a moment we lose for something else. And yet, instead of facing this reality, we keep pretending we can outmaneuver it. We tell ourselves we'll find time later, that if we just push a little harder, clear a few more tasks, and stay disciplined, we'll eventually reach a point where everything is handled. But as we know, that point will never arrive. And here's the paradox. The more we fight against our limits, the more trapped we become. And the way out isn't more control, it's more acceptance. Instead of trying to do everything, we have to choose. Instead of measuring our days by how much we accomplish, we need to ask, am I spending my time on what truly matters? And when we make that shift, everything will change. Because when you stop trying to fit everything in, you start making space for what actually counts. And when you stop fighting against time, you start experiencing it. When you stop chasing control, you finally feel free. I like this idea a lot.
It's cool, isn't it? And when you were reading that, what came to mind was like, it's something that you just have to accept. It's kind of like, it reminded me of like Jung, the idea of like integrating the shadow, integrating your weakness. And although this isn't a weakness, it is just a fact that like you won't get everything done. And the only way that you can start making good decisions is if you accept that fact and you acknowledge it. And then it's like, oh, I'm fully integrated now. It's like, okay, now that I have that in my perspective of how the world works, now I can make proper decisions that are more beneficial for me.
Yeah. Well, I guess it just whittles it down to like, right, cool. I can't get everything done. So let's just do the things that actually matter. It kind of opens that up easier because you're like, I'm doing all this stuff that I don't really care about and I can't get it all done anyway. So why wouldn't I just do all the things that actually matter to me rather than the things that don't?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it doesn't apply, obviously, if you're employed, you just like put your hands up like, screw it.
Yeah.
I don't like any of this work. I'm not doing anything anymore.
Yes.
But I think especially when it comes to personal based like choices outside of work and hobbies and stuff like that, I think this is where it's most pertinent.
And then again, like, you don't have to work at that place. If it's something that you value, then you're choosing to do that at the end of the day. But if it's not, or like, you value other things above and beyond that, well, then you always have the choice to be like, well, okay, fine. I'm going to find a different job.
I want to say actually maybe one of the main problems with this actually, and I've noticed it myself recently, but I've been doing quite a lot of like self-work on it, is a lot of people don't know what they value.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're not really clear on what they actually do value or what they want almost, I feel like we have a rough idea, but we don't actually know clearly what it is unless you really think about it. Maybe even using these sort of ideas as a thought experiment, like, time is finite. What would I do if, if money wasn't an object, or if I could, what would I do? And maybe that will reveal some values. But I do think a lot of people don't actually know, and I include myself in that, clearly what my actual values are. And I think they change as well over time, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, once you have kids, I'm sure your values will go way more towards like family than somebody who doesn't have kids.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really important to kind of sit down and actually figure that out. And even like whether you create a vague plan, be like, well, where do I want to be? Or what do I want to be doing in a few years from now? It won't work out exactly how you plan it, but like at least you have a kind of direction that you're going in and you know what you're kind of pursuing. And that way, once you have that in mind, you can start making decisions that are a bit more in line with what you actually want and what you value, rather than like, fuck, I don't really know. Okay, I'm going to say no to that and yes to this, but then, turns out that you don't make that.
No, I agree. I think the choices with this sort of stuff come much clearer when you have a clear idea of your values. It's kind of why it's a good idea to kind of figure out what are the traits or the things that you value the most, and then how can you design a life around those values? Or how can you make decisions? I think once you do know these things, decisions become easier because you just evaluate the decision through the values. Like, is this going to, let's say one of them's freedom, is this decision going to give me more freedom? If the answer is no, then you just don't take it.
Exactly.
So all that being said, there's now one more piece to this puzzle. So if time isn't something to manage, if it isn't something to be lived, sorry, Mark, it's not something to be lived long. Right. But there's one more piece to this puzzle. If time isn't something to manage, if it's something to be lived, then the real question isn't how to optimize it, is where to place your attention. Because in the end, your life isn't the sum of your plans, it's the sum of what you focus on. And that's what we'll explore next.
Yes, so attention as the true currency of life. See, we think of time as our most valuable resource, but that's not quite right. See, attention is. Because in the end, your life isn't measured by how much time you had, it's measured by what you paid attention to. Think about it. At the end of your life, you won't remember the hours you spent being efficient. You'll remember the moments that truly mattered, the things you noticed, the people you connected with, the experiences that made you feel alive. But here's the problem. We're constantly distracted. We let our attention get pulled in 100 different ways: emails, notifications, endless scrolling, without ever stopping to ask, is this really how I want to spend my life? And this isn't just about technology. I mean, distractions run deeper than that. We distract ourselves from hard conversations, from difficult emotions, from the fear that maybe, just maybe, we're spending our time on the wrong things. And so instead of being fully present, we chase the next task, the next goal, the next dopamine hit, always looking ahead, never fully here. But here's the real danger. What we focus on becomes our life. Every moment spent on something meaningless is a moment stolen from something meaningful. Every time we chase productivity for its own sake, we lose the chance to truly experience the life we're optimizing for. So what's the solution? It's not about blocking distractions or forcing relentless focus. It's about asking a simple but radical question. What actually deserves my attention? Because once you start answering that, once you start choosing where your focus goes instead of letting the world choose for you, your life starts to change. I think this is such a powerful idea. It really is. And I think it probably speaks to almost anyone who is like doom scrolled and just been on Instagram for God knows how long. And then you like question your life afterwards. You're like, fuck, I just spent a whole hour just watching stupid shit. But yeah, it is really powerful and important. The idea that like whatever you put your attention to, that becomes your life. I love that. I might get that tattooed across my face.
Yeah, I like the question as well. I think it was what's worth my attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, what actually deserves my attention? There you go. That's powerful as well. It's almost something you could try and every time you notice you're distracted, it's like, is this actually worth my attention? You know, is applying my attention to this issue gonna change it? Almost.
Absolutely.
Sounds almost like stoic in that respect.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So this brings us to the next big shift. Why letting go of control might be the most freeing thing you'll ever do.
So yes, the next idea, letting go of control and embracing uncertainty. We crave control. We plan, we organise, we try to anticipate every possible outcome, believing that if we just prepare enough, we can keep life predictable. But deep down, we know the truth. We're never really in control. No matter how well we plan, things go wrong. Deadlines shift, plans fall apart, people leave, life surprises us in ways we never expected. And yet, instead of accepting this, we fight it. We cling to the illusion that if we just work harder, schedule better, or push through, we'll finally get a grip on everything. But here's what no one tells you. The more you try to control life, the more anxious you become. Because when you demand certainty, you create stress. You feel like you can't relax until everything is handled, except everything never is. And so you stay locked in a cycle of planning, worrying, and micromanaging a future that refuses to obey. And the solution isn't better planning, it's actually letting go. So not in the passive give up on life sense, but in the freeing sense where you stop needing certainty before you take action, where you make peace with the unknown, where you trust yourself to handle what comes instead of trying to predict every outcome in advance. Because the paradox of control is this: the less you cling to it, the more freedom you gain. And when you stop needing guarantees, you start living. And when you stop obsessing over the future, you make space for the present. And when you accept that some things will always be uncertain, you find the clarity to focus on what actually matters. Yeah, this is kind of like Buddhist ideas, isn't it? Like the attachment, like you almost attachment to future outcomes is kind of the issue here. When you're attached to control and what you think should materialize in the world, that's when you feel the most anxiety and stress.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because like these are universal laws, but they're like abstract. Whereas, for example, imagine not believing in the laws of physics and trying to operate on daily life. Like you wouldn't be able to function properly, right? You have to be grounded to reality. That is reality. Just as the idea that like, you know, you have to accept that there's finitude and you don't have as much time in the world, and that you have to make decisions and you have to prioritize like meaningful tasks. That is reality. It's just, it's more abstract. It's harder to like gauge. But if you're not acting in reality, then you're just constantly like fighting against it. And it's always just going to slow you down. And it's just one of those kind of
100%.
universal rules that you just have to take on board to be able to actually live in an optimized way, you know, for yourself.
Yeah. Because essentially the point, I guess, is like when you're trying to control the world, you have an illusion of like the future, if that makes sense. Because if you're trying to control something, you're like, I understand how things work, so I predicted this is going to happen. And therefore the anxiety and pain comes when that thing doesn't happen and your illusion is revealed
Well, yeah,
by
you're
reality.
operating in like a false reality.
Yeah, exactly, a false illusion, like false premise, a false reality. And there is, I'm gonna forget the quote, but there's something about being truth is like the ultimate pain sort of thing, because it's like it is what reveals itself to like take down the illusions that you have around what's meant to be, you know.
Yeah.
Because we all have our ideas of like, we all predict the future to some extent, like subconsciously. Like people want things to happen in a certain way, right? Otherwise, if we didn't, we would feel like we have no control ever. But I guess this is the point. It's kind of realizing that fine, we do want to try and control things, but the reality is actually we need to sit back and be like, we can't actually. A lot of it is just luck. I mean, obviously we can manipulate certain things. Like I can pick something up and, you know, I can control my hands and pick something up, but the grand scheme of our lives is not dictated by us, really.
No.
We have the illusion of control.
Well, absolutely. Like it's truth. That's an interesting point. Truth is immediate pain, but it's long-term benefit.
Yes.
Right? Because someone who is grounded in reality is grounded in truth.
Only if you accept it, though.
Sorry?
Only if you accept it.
Well, yes, but that's
I would
the
even
point.
argue,
As in, like, if you accept it, it's initially, yes, the illusion is broken. It's, you know, oh, I can't do everything in life. This is really sad. But you'll find that the person who accepts the truth in the long run will be much more well off because they're now operating in reality, you know?
I would even say on an emotional level as well, right? I'd actually say maybe some people who have the most emotional issues, this is probably a bit of a hot take, but probably are people who can't really accept the truth, if that makes sense. So they always react emotionally to things because they can't accept the fact that they actually can't control what's going on. And they almost fight that illusion, you know? It's like people holding on to these ideas, these illusions of what they believe, and fighting, you know, tooth and... I mean, look at just all the people killing each other for, like, ideas.
Yeah.
That's like an example of what happens when you don't accept the truth that there is more than one way of seeing things. So if control isn't the answer, then what is? How do we navigate time without trying to master it? And that's where we turn to next. The power of doing less, but doing it better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've been conditioned to believe that success comes from doing more. More tasks, more responsibilities, more commitments. But what if the key to a meaningful life isn't adding more, but cutting back? Because here's the truth. You don't need to do everything. You just need to do the right things well. But that's where we get stuck. We assume that if something feels important, we have to make time for it. We try to keep all our options open, to stay involved in everything that seems meaningful. And in doing so, we spread ourselves so thin that we don't give anything the attention it truly deserves. We need to stop asking, how can I fit more in? And start asking, what deserves my time? And the answers won't be everything. In fact, most of it won't make the cut. And that's the hard part, accepting that some things, even things that seem important, will have to be left undone. That not every opportunity can be seized. That in order to do great work, build real relationships, and live a life that feels meaningful, we have to be ruthless about what we focus on. This isn't about neglect, it's about depth. It's about choosing a few things and committing fully, instead of trying to do everything and skimming the surface. Because what's better? A life spent half present in 100 different pursuits, or a life spent fully engaged in a few things that actually matter?
I mean, this is just building on the other points, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
About choosing wisely on the things that matter and then doing them with more depth.
Yeah. And that brings us to the next idea, how embracing limitation can be the key to true freedom.
Oh, yes, it can. So we spent so much of our lives resisting limits. We see them as obstacles, things that hold us back from what we could achieve, if only we had more time, more energy, or more resources. But what if limits aren't the enemy? What if they're the very thing that makes life meaningful? Because every choice we make closes the door on countless other possibilities. That's not a failure, and that is the point. The fact that we can't do everything is what makes the things we choose to do actually matter. Imagine a world with unlimited time, no urgency, no trade offs, no hard decisions. It sounds really great until you realize that without limits, nothing would ever feel important. There would be no weight to our choices, no reason to prioritize, and no reason even to care. So, embracing limitation is the key to freedom because once you accept that you can't do everything, you stop trying. You stop feeling guilty for not keeping up. You stop chasing an impossible standard. And once you stop fighting against reality, you gain something far more valuable: clarity. You start choosing deliberately. You stop filling your life with obligations that don't serve you. You stop delaying the things that truly matter, waiting for some mythical later when you'll finally have time. Because this is it. This moment, this life, there is no extra time waiting around the corner. There is only the time you choose to use wisely. So instead of resenting your limits, what if you leaned into them? What if you used them to sharpen your focus, to cut out the noise and spend your time on what truly counts?
Yeah.
Just a big call to action, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yeah, but it's funny because just like everyone can relate to this. You know what I mean? It's like I feel like every single person has been there.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I still remember, what was the Chris Williamson point? Oh my god, I can't remember the name of it. But it's the idea that you need a certain amount of pain or activation energy to make the change, to start actually prioritizing things you care about. I can't even remember what it's called, like something complacency. But I feel like we're all in that stage where we almost all have these other things or hobbies or interests that we want to pursue, and we once again use the excuses such as like, I don't have the time or whatever. But you almost need the pain of not changing to be higher than the comfortability of your life, right? To then push you to be like, right, I'm actually going to start doing these things now.
Yeah, absolutely. You need that like fire beneath you to just get you moving.
Exactly. So this leads us to the next idea: why the pursuit of convenience is making our lives emptier, and what to do instead.
Yeah, so we are not people who have time, we are time. We talk about time as if it's something we own. We say we have time, that we spend time, waste time, and run out of time, like it's a possession we can manage. But that's not how it works. See, we are time. Think about it. You don't experience time as something separate from yourself. You don't use time, you exist within it. Every moment of your life is a moment of time unfolding. Your choices, your actions, your very existence is time in motion. And this realization changes everything. Because if time isn't something we have, then trying to manage it is the wrong approach. Instead of treating time like a resource to optimize, we need to start treating it like an experience to live. But that's exactly what we resist. We try to outmaneuver time, to squeeze more into every day, to push back against the reality that we are finite. And in doing so, we make ourselves miserable. Because the real fear isn't that we're wasting time, it's that we're wasting ourselves, that we're spending our days on things that don't matter, that we're running out of moments that could have been meaningful, but weren't. And that's why this shift is so powerful. When you stop seeing time as something to control and start seeing it as something to be present in, everything changes. You stop feeling guilty for not doing enough. You stop rushing through your days. You stop waiting for some future moment when you'll finally have time for the things that matter. Because this is it. This is all you ever get. And the way you live it right now is the only thing that actually counts. So the real question isn't, how do I get more done? It's, how do I make sure the way I'm spending my time feels worth it? And I really love that point. I think it's so cool. It's not the fact that we're wasting time, it's that we're wasting ourselves. Because that is the thought that you get. That's the ruminating thing at the back of your mind when like you haven't been productive and you're like, fuck, it's not I'm wasting time. It's like, what am I amounting to? What am I doing?
What am I amounting to?
Yeah, that's funny.
An Instagram doom scroller who loves memes.
Fuck, I need to delete that shit.
I'll join you, mate. We'll do a
little cleanse.
I was gonna say mid-Feb challenge or something. Yeah. 2-week delete marathon.
Yeah. No, exactly. So then, that leads us to the next idea: the power of hobbies and useless activities.
Oh, useless. That's very, very
It
strong.
is. Whoa.
So, yeah. In a world obsessed with productivity, hobbies have become suspicious. If something doesn't contribute to your career, self improvement, or financial success, it's often seen as a waste of time. What if the point of a hobby is that it doesn't need a point? There's something radical about doing something just because you enjoy it. Not because it makes you money, not because it helps you improve, not because it's useful, just because it makes life richer. And yet we resist this. We feel guilty about time spent on things that don't seem productive. We treat leisure as something that needs to be earned, and we forget that some of the most meaningful moments in life come from things that serve no practical purpose at all. A conversation that doesn't lead to a networking opportunity, a sketch no one will ever see, a walk with no destination. These moments aren't distractions from life, they are life. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Hobbies aren't just valuable because they bring joy, they also teach us how to be bad at something without caring. In a world that pressures us to excel at everything, hobbies give us permission to be mediocre, to do something just for the sake of doing it, to reclaim time from the grip of efficiency and remind ourselves that not everything needs to be optimized. So maybe the real waste of time isn't doing something useless. Maybe the real waste is never allowing ourselves the freedom to do something just for the love of it.
Mm.
And I like that point. I mean, there's plenty of things that people do day to day, which you could technically argue from a perspective is practically pointless. We look at video games.
Yeah.
They don't have a practical utility or usefulness in society, really.
Yeah.
I mean, but people do them for their own pleasure, almost, right? I'm sure there's plenty of people out there. I mean, even myself at the moment, I feel guilty for playing too much, just because I feel like once again I'm in this efficiency trap of like I'm wasting my time by not like if I'm playing a video game, there's no practical purpose to it, you know. But the reality is, obviously, if you enjoy it during the moment, then, like we said, your life is just time.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying yourself in the moment, why not?
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's, yeah, I think we need to shift our way of thinking out of this kind of utilitarian perspective of everything that we do, that everything has to like yield something great and that you can't just enjoy it for the sake of it, that something can't just be just fun, you know?
Yeah.
Because what you deem valuable at the end of the day is up to you. If you like doing
I don't really
it,
know how we got to this point though, right? With the social conditioning, where it's almost so strong now that like, and maybe it's just us. I don't know. I'm sure there's other people out there who feel the pressure, but like, where you're right, it's literally like, if you're not doing something what you deemed useful, you almost have this like overriding guilt near the end of the day, where it's like, did I do something useful today? It's mental.
No,
Because where has that standard come from in my head? Because I didn't create that. If that makes sense. I'm not the one who's whipping. Well, I am now whipping myself, but somebody else has put that or programmed that into my brain, where I'm now whipping myself for no reason other than the fact that I think that's what I should be doing.
Yeah, I think our culture is just so conditioned for it, and especially I would say at our age in particular, because I think there's a push to kind of define yourself before your 30s. Like, you know, what are you? What are you doing? What kind of job? What kind of career do you have? Will you be able to afford a house? All that kind of stuff. And I think that's kind of an overlooming, I don't know, like thought that constantly impacts how we make decisions. Because I'd like to be like, this is the kind of person I want to be, but at the same time, I need to live, I need to make money, I need to be able to do this. And so if I choose to prioritize that, then everything within that just reinforces that kind of efficiency, like perspective, that idea, like, oh fuck, I need to make the most out of this because I need to complete that so that then I can be this person, you know. But that doesn't really go away. It's almost like you have to incorporate all of that. But
yeah, it's crazy how we've all been like, yeah, because you don't get born with that drive. Let's put it that way.
No, you don't.
So yeah, why is it so hard to do things just because we like it? And why do we struggle so much with slowing down, with doing less, with embracing the simple and the unoptimized? Well, that's what we're going to explore next. Why we struggle with slowing down.
Yeah, so we know we need rest. We know we can't run at full speed forever. And yet, when we finally have a moment to slow down, we don't. We reach for our phones, we refresh our emails. God, I do that so often. We fill the silence with something, anything, to avoid the discomfort of doing nothing. But why? Why is slowing down so hard? It's because we've been conditioned to believe that our worth is tied to our productivity, that if we're not accomplishing something, we're falling behind, that if we're not moving forward, we're failing. And so when we try to slow down, an inner voice kicks in. Shouldn't you be doing something useful? Aren't you wasting time? Other people are getting ahead while you're just sitting here. But here's the truth. Speed is a trap. The faster we move, the harder it is to stop. The more we push, the more unnatural it feels to pause. And worst of all, the faster life goes, the more we miss. The depth, the meaning, the quiet moments that actually make life worth living. The problem isn't just that we're busy, it's that we've lost the ability to simply be. But what if we saw slowing down not as a failure, but as a skill? Because that's exactly what it is. It takes effort to do less. It takes practice to sit in stillness without reaching for a distraction. It takes courage to be present in a world that constantly demands we move faster. But when we do, when we let ourselves slow down, everything changes. We start noticing life instead of rushing through it. We stop feeling like we're always behind. We realize that presence is more valuable than progress. And actually, like, it's funny, I think I was reading this at the same time that my sister went to do like a 10-day silent retreat. And it's something I really want to do. Because it's the idea that you just have, like, all day you're meditating for like 10 hours a day. And it is supposed to be completely devoid of any kind of pleasure, so to speak, right? So it forces your brain to just sit with stillness, with boredom, and you're training your mind not to constantly seek the past and indulge in the past or indulge in future fantasies. It's just to be able to kind of sit and be present and be okay with that, and not constantly try to seek something that distracts you from the finitude of life. You know, the fact that you need to always be doing something because you need to be making the most of time. And it's something I want to do this year. It's on my like little bucket list. But yeah, for like 10 days where you just like sit and train yourself, because we constantly are indulging in something. Even if we're not on our phone, it's like, oh, I'm thinking about this last week, or I'm thinking about what I need to do next week, or I'm thinking about this fantasy of what I want to do.
My mind's always on the move.
Absolutely.
Like, I even find myself when I cook, sometimes I'm like watching something at the same time or listening to something. It's like there's never a point where the inputs stop almost.
So, what is the best way to develop the skill of slowing down? Patience. Because in a world obsessed with speed, patience is a quiet form of power. And that's what we'll explore next, the role of patience in a meaningful life.
So we think of patience as passive, waiting around, doing nothing, putting up with delays. But in reality, patience is a skill, a discipline, and a quiet form of power. Because in a world that moves at breakneck speed, the ability to slow down, to wait, to resist the pull of urgency is rare. And here's why it matters. Good things often take time. Deep relationships, mastery of a skill, building something meaningful. None of these happen overnight. But when we're addicted to speed, we expect them to. We chase quick results, instant gratification, and effortless success, only to find ourselves constantly disappointed. Well, patience is the antidote. It's the ability to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to escape it, to commit to the process instead of demanding immediate results, to trust that some things are worth waiting for. And paradoxically, patience doesn't slow you down, it frees you. When you stop expecting instant progress, you stop feeling frustrated when things take time. And when you stop trying to force outcomes, you start appreciating the journey. And when you stop demanding certainty, you start embracing life as it unfolds. Patience isn't about giving up on achievement. It's about realizing that real achievement, the kind that matters, can't be rushed. And yeah, this is true. I mean, I think it reminds me a little bit of the Alex Hormozy point, which is like, we sometimes get confused around feelings and actions. So like, for example, if you feel impatient, but you act in a way that's patient, sorry, that is patience, if that makes sense. Because I'm often like that, where I'm like, oh, I'm being impatient. But the reality is, yes, I can feel those feelings, but if I don't act impatiently, then I am technically still being patient. And it's hard to overcome, I guess, our feelings of wanting things instantaneously, wanting things now, because obviously that's all that marketing promises us, right? Like, like the golden rule of like marketing is like, sell them the dream outcome and tell them it's fucking easy. And that's all we get told, you know, like instant 6-packs in 3 weeks or something. I mean, if you're like morbidly obese, good luck with that. So yeah, we've been sort of we're being bombarded everywhere with this idea of like quick results. I mean, all of these courses online, it's like, oh, achieve 6-figure incomes in a month, because nobody wants to do the work.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that patience.
Yeah.
Or nobody wants to be patient, sorry. But in reality, I guess he is correct here. Like, it is a skill. It's something you can develop.
Yeah, it's like a muscle. Because it's being able to
Like
accept that you don't get the goal or the outcome straight away. And just being able to be patient with that, But yeah, it is difficult in a society like ours where, like you said, just everything is aimed at now, next day delivery, this, that, everything.
So yeah, this brings us to the final and maybe the most important idea: accepting the unfinished nature of life.
Yeah, so we chase the feeling of being done. The day when we'll finally be on top of everything, when the to-do list will be empty, the loose ends tied up, the uncertainty resolved. But that day never comes. Because life isn't something you finish, it's something you live. There will always be more to do, more problems to solve, more ambitions to pursue, and if we measure our success by completion, we'll always feel behind. But here's the shift that changes everything. What if being unfinished isn't a problem? What if it's the point? The fact that we'll never catch up means we'll never run out of things to strive for, learn, and experience. The fact that life is uncertain means it's alive, not a checklist to be completed, but a story that's constantly unfolding. And that's not something to resent, that's something to embrace. Because once you stop trying to get everything under control, you start to feel at peace. You stop feeling guilty for not doing enough. You stop delaying happiness for some future moment when things will be settled. You realize that this messy, imperfect, always in progress life is all you ever get. And the most important thing you can do is show up for it. Not waiting until you feel ready, not hoping for some perfect moment, not postponing what matters for some distant later, but being here and now. Because there is no finish line. There is no final destination where everything is handled. There is only this moment and how you choose to live it.
I mean, that's just, it does. I like that idea a lot. But the only sort of choice you really have is just showing up for life.
Yeah.
That's all you can do, because it is messy, it's imperfect. Things aren't going to go the way you want them to go. We as we discussed this whole podcast, you can't control life. You can only sort of, I guess, react to it and accept what gets thrown in your direction. And therefore, the skill is actually being patient and showing up and trusting, I guess, in I was going to say the word destiny. I don't like destiny. But just trusting that things will work out in the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's accepting a hard truth, but the only reason it's labeled as a hard truth is it's because it's in contrast to how we're taught to think about the world and going into the world. And that, like, we have to be ambitious. We have to get the most out of everything that we do. We have to be busy all the time. Everything has to be high yield. You can't just enjoy something for the sake of it. But once you accept that hard truth, you're so much better off, because then you realize it's not hard truth, it's just truth. And actually it alleviates, it frees a lot of things up.
Yeah. I just had a really, really weird thought, which probably is, once again, it's another very hot take. It's only because I've been doing a lot of like Stoicism reading recently. And obviously Stoicism in the past almost gives you this sort of philosophy and framework to approach life in this sort of way that's accepting and focusing on the things you control and not control, and kind of gives you, I guess, a flu jab to reality, in the sense that you can actually kind of see it for what it is and accept it. Whereas I feel like the more I think about it, the reason why there's so many people like defaulting now back to the ancient philosophies, because they realize how much purpose it can serve in helping you navigate the suffering of reality, let's just call it. Yeah. And then I was thinking, because this stuff isn't taught at schools, I'm wondering if our mental health crisis is almost set up because we haven't been told or taught these ways to actually accept reality. And we kind of get, this whole like mollycoddling of kids and being like, oh, you're the best, you're this and that. You kind of almost set them up for absolute failure, because you're giving them all these illusions that get destroyed by reality. And then we haven't been taught the sort of like meta philosophies of life to actually cope with the changes of life and the suffering that is caused by being unable to control what happens to you.
Yeah, well, I think
it's a hot take.
Yeah, I think a couple points on that. Like, one, I think there definitely is that idea of inflating someone's self-esteem beyond what they're actually capable of, competent of,
Yeah, but giving
and
them an
also what they're
illusion
like
of
overall. Yes, you can do anything that you want in life to an extent, but also you can't do everything, and there needs to be that differentiating factor. And I think also schools, a lot of the way that they're structured was structured for industrial revolution, where you're doing rote things and literally trying to make the most out of your time. And it's almost like it's embedded in, I don't know, the education system to think like that. I don't think you don't really get taught philosophies or different ways to see something at school, right? Because it's like you're focusing on a pure primary subject. Yeah, it's interesting.
They usually have the right or wrong answer because that's the only way you can test.
Yeah, exactly. They teach you one frame. They don't teach you multiple.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. And that obviously you could then argue that gives you mental inflexibility because you almost get conditioned through that to believe there is only one way to see things. And
well, you're constructing a model for the 13 years that you're at school of how reality works. But reality, one, it's outdated. It doesn't, there's such a discrepancy when you actually apply that model to the real world, especially now with how you're seeing, people be successful by like marketing themselves and having a personal brand, something that is literally just not taught at school because, we have all this equipment. We can podcast now. Everyone's got one. Like, it's crazy how easy it is to access millions and millions of people. But when at school was that ever something that was, communicated to you? It didn't exist. So they teach you a model that is just a bit outdated.
For sure. Well, there you go. That's what causes all these problems with time, eh?
One of them.
You're conditioned from a young age.
Yeah.
Cool. So, moving on to then, let's just conclude quickly. So, we spend our lives chasing control. We try to be more productive, to optimize every moment, and to finally get on top of everything. But the truth is, we're playing a game we can't win. Because time isn't something to master, it's something to experience. And the more we try to fit everything in, the more overwhelmed we feel. The more we rush, and the less we actually live. And the more we chase certainty, the more anxious we become. But there's another way. Instead of trying to control time, we can choose how we live within it. And this means letting go of the illusion of productivity as a solution. The goal isn't to get everything done, it's to get the right things done. Then accepting that you'll never have time for everything and realizing that's what makes your choices meaningful. Now, focusing on attention and not just time, because what you focus on is your life. Then, learning to embrace stillness, patience, and limits, because real fulfillment doesn't come from speed, it comes from depth. Then, making peace with the unfinished nature of life, because there's no finish line, no moment when everything is handled, and no day when we'll feel completely on top of time. The only real question is, what deserves your time? Because in the end, we're not people who have time, we are time. And the way we choose to spend it is the way we choose to live.
Amen. Such wise words. God. So, if this episode made you rethink your relationship with time, consider subscribing. We break down powerful books like this to give you insights you can actually use. So if you found this valuable, hit that like button and subscribe. And before you go, ask yourself, what's one thing you'll change about how you spend your time? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.